Taped live at the Roosevelt Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, it's the 26th Annual Nebula Awards, presented by the Science Fiction Writers of America, featuring Grandmaster recipient Lester Del Rey, keynote speaker Hugh Downs, presenters Isaac Asimov, Terry Brooks, Joan Vinge, and George Zebrowski, Master of Ceremonies and SFWA President Ben Bova, plus lots of special guests.
Hi, I'm Andrea Lipinski.
And I'm Keith DeCandido. Welcome to Lucky Shot Productions' special presentation of the Nebula Awards banquet. Tonight we're going to be giving you highlights of the banquet as well as a few interviews with some people who are here this evening. The nominees this year for Best Novel are Tehanu, The Last Book of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, Mary Riley by Valerie Martin, The Only Begotten Daughter, written by James Morrow, The Fall of Hyperion, the sequel to the Nebula Award-winning Hyperion by Dan Simmons, Redshift Rendezvous by John E. Stith, and White Jenna, written by Jane Yolen, which is also a sequel. The other categories include Best Novella, Best Novelette, and Best Short Story. And some of the nominees include, again, Ursula Le Guin, Daffodil Abhue, Susan Schwartz, Kristine Rusch, and a bunch of others.
Also this year there is going to be a Grand Master Award awarded to
Lester Del Rey.
Lester Del Rey.
Yes. He is the driving force behind Del Rey Books, hence the name. Anyway, hope you enjoy the show. I'm here with Jane Yolen, who is one of tonight's nominees. Her novel, White Jenna, has been nominated for a Nebula for Best Novel tonight. And what exactly is White Jenna about?
Well, White Jenna is, I like to tell people it's a novel that is about 600 pages long, artfully broken in two. So it's the second part of two novels. It's really about that nexus point between folklore, history, legend, artfully disguised as a sword and sorcery novel, but it's not really. It's got legends, it's got ballads, it's got music, it's got stories, it's got lullabies. It's got a little bit of everything in it. All told by various narrators, none of whom are quite telling you the truth, because none of them has the truth. And when it's all put together, you begin to have a picture of what might actually have gone on. I just think that all of history really is a sort of a series of interlocking lies. We'll never really know what happened in the past, so you take your best shot at it. And if you're a historian, you look at it one way. If you're an anthropologist, you look at it another way. If you are a folklorist, as I am, you look at it another way. And the storytellers look at it, I think, maybe the best way of all.
What do you think your chances are tonight of walking away with a Nebula?
Very small. I had a Nebula nominee last year and one the year before in the short fiction, and I really thought I might have had a shot at it 2 years ago. There are 3 very good science fiction novels up for it, and even if they knocked each other out, there's still Ursula Le Guin. So I'm just having a good time.
That's good. Thank you.
I'm here with Mary Mason, a science fiction author and the organizer of the Nebula Awards. Mary, can you tell me a little bit about the Nebula Awards themselves, the physical awards?
I think they're the most beautiful awards ever made. They beat the Oscars all hollow. Bill Rotsler came up with a design in conglomeration with several other science fiction artists 26 years ago. They're unique in that they're solid casts of lucite, and each one is different. There have never been and never will be 2 nebulas that look alike. For instance, for Andre Norton's Grand Master, because she had done so many wonderful time travel stories, he took the inside parts of dozens of watches and clocks and fitted the gears and the wheels and the faces and the hands all through the lucite and embedded them. Others have had mineral crystals. For a while, for several years, he's been doing a series of ones with metal turnings, look like alien buildings that were gorgeous. This year he has sort of planets with rock spheres. It's a new trend, and I like it. It's another new series.
So there's usually a different theme or a different series every year?
Oh, certainly. Bill Rotsler says he spends about 5 months of the year just scavenging rock clubs and unusual mineral specimens and antique stores and all kinds of places to find the right interesting things to put in them.
What about the Grand Master Award? What is special about that?
It's only given out very rarely. The Grand Master can't be given out more than once every 2 years. It's voted on by the past presidents and the current officers of SEFWA, It is for the lifetime achievement of a writer that has been both made a profound and lasting change in the field. Our past Grandmasters, our first, of course, was the late Robert Heinlein. Also Isaac Asimov, Fred Pohl, Fritz Leiber, Alfred Bester, and this year we're presenting one, so certainly a man who qualifies on at least 2 counts, as a writer and as an editor and leader of a book line, Lester Del Rey.
Are they very dangerous or very complicated to make?
Actually, they are. Lucite's a really unusual thing because it's a liquid you pour around other stuff to make these, and then you bake them in a kiln. And sometimes with the outgassing, you get weird chemical reactions you can't predict. If you normally will, go ahead and bake 6. He feels good if he gets 4 out of it that haven't exploded. I mean, it's impressive when they explode. You get lucite all over everything. And then it goes and damages everything else. But after you get them, cast everything, if they polish out and everything's fine, they're beautiful, you can't check them in your baggage. You have to carry them on the plane because in an unpressurized cabin, they can explode again. And so we did have one person who actually came out and got one. It didn't leave the box, but the whole inside fractured and it kind of bulged and looked weird. And they wouldn't give it up, but Bill Rotzler made him a new one anyway.
So there's no danger of them exploding now, say?
Oh, no, not unless we suddenly wind up with, like, the pressure of 40,000 feet. But if we wind up with the pressure of 40,000 feet, those are the least of our worries.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I'm here with Charles Sheffield, who is an author of both fiction and nonfiction and science fiction. His latest book is Divergence, which was recently released. And how do you feel, as someone who is not nominated tonight, how do you feel about the nominees this year?
Well, like anyone who's not nominated, I feel a lot more relaxed than anyone who is nominated. This year, I think the toughest category to call, by which I mean to estimate a winner, is the novel. And the reason for that is the books are both very good and very diverse, very different from each other. Some years you get an obvious candidate as a runaway winner. Not this year. This year, I wouldn't be surprised at any one of those books winning. And of course, I've spoken to the finalists, and they're all convinced they're going to lose, which is fair enough. But there'll be a winner, but I would hate to try and project it to that right now.
Okay. You recently took a trip to Europe, you mentioned, and it's some interesting things about the state of publishing there. Could you?
That's right. I got back about a couple of weeks ago. I was over in London to look at science fiction and to promote my own books. The week I got there, they laid off about 10% of everyone associated with science fiction publishing in Britain. And most of the big publishers had very severe cutbacks. And I had arranged to go to a number of parties. It was like going to wakes because all that people talked about was Nick's gone, Fred's gone, Jim thinks his job is on the line. So that was a very sobering experience, and let's hope it's not going to happen here.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. I hope you get something.
I'm here with John Stith, who is one of tonight's nominees for Best Novel for his hard science book, Redshift Rendezvous. Can you tell us a little bit about how the book came about?
Sure. Quite a few years ago, I had an idea in my files that said, what happens if relativistic events could take place at observable speeds? And the idea just sat in my file for quite a few years, and in about 1985, I dug it out and finally had another idea I could put with it. And I came up with the idea of a hyperspace ship that travels in an unusual region of space where the speed of light is 10 meters per second. And so you can, aboard this ship, optical illusions are ever present and relativistic tricks happen. You can break the sound barrier if you run fast. I had lots of fun with it.
What do you think your chances are of winning tonight?
Boy, I guess if I had to bet, I would probably bet on Simmons. Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion is a tough combination to compete with. But I think I actually have a chance, and that's good. And I just feel really good to be nominated. That's really an honor for me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm here with David Hartwell, who's the director of science fiction at William Morrow and the editor of James Morrow's Only Begotten Daughter, which is nominee for a Nebula tonight. Mr. Hartwell, what do you think the chances are?
Well, in fact, no one knows what the chances are because there are 5 novels nominated. They're the best in the fantasy and science fiction field from the last year. And, in fact, they're very different novels one from another, everything from straight science fiction to straight fantasy. The membership numbers over 1,000 and votes each year. And it's a real horse race. It's something that everybody's interested in and everybody's, in fact, excited about.
Do you have any other favorites in the other categories, the novellas, the short stories?
Oh, well, my personal favorite is Terry Bisson's Bears Discover Fire, which I think is a wonderful, funny story, and I hope it wins.
Okay. Well, good luck to you. And,
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
I hope you enjoy the evening.
Thank you. You too.
But first, I want to introduce a person you might not think of as part of our family, but indeed he is. Our guest speaker this evening is Hugh Downs. Now, you might think this is a man who needs no introduction, but I'm up here, and by God, I'm going to introduce him. I've known Hugh since an ill-fated attempt to watch the final Apollo launch aboard a Holland America Lines cruise ship. In many ways, this was a cruise on the Ship of Fools. I won't go into all the details, but a little while after that, I was very surprised to get a phone call from Hugh at my office. Then I was at Omni Magazine, and it turns out that Hugh is not only the person you've seen all your lives in television. Hugh is a student of cosmology, a serious student of cosmology, and a science fiction writer. I had the pleasure of publishing one of Hugh's stories in Omni Magazine. It's called The Longest Story Ever Written. It is one of the shortest I ever published. And Hugh and Isaac were arguing a little earlier this evening over who wrote the shorter story spanning the longer time span. And I think Hugh wins. What is it, 82 billion years? 82 billion years in a few thousand words. Would that everyone were that succinct. But I want to welcome a man who is a kindred spirit and a wonderful friend, Mr. Hugh Downs.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the kind words. I think of something that Will Rogers once said when somebody introduced him and said some nice things about him. He said, "I wish my parents could have heard that introduction." He said, "My father would have enjoyed it, and my mother would have believed it." Tonight, I want to speak briefly about science fiction. In the capacity of a science fiction reader, which I am, and the fact that Ben has pointed out that to a certain extent I am a science fiction writer, I feel a little as though I'm a chihuahua at a convention of St. Bernards. But I don't know how many of you may have, some of you may have attended this, but once at Jet Propulsion Laboratories, Senator Frank Moss told this story, and I think it's applicable. There was a man. When you think of speaking to people who are more expert even than the speaker on the subject at hand, there was a man who had survived the Johnstown flood. And he had gone around, not only survived it, but he went around in a rowboat and rescued an old couple off the roof of their house, which was about to be swept away. And he spent the rest of a long and relatively uneventful life giving occasional speeches where he told about his heroism in rescuing this old couple from the roof of their house. And he finally died and went to heaven. And when he got to heaven, St. Peter said, you know, there's one thing, newcomers are always allowed to get stage one initial event. It's just whatever your dream has been, you're allowed to do. And the man said immediately, he said, what I'd like to do is to give my speech about how I rescued this couple in the Johnstown flood. And St. Peter said, that can be arranged, and we'll do it. But I should warn you, Noah will be in the audience. Somebody once said that and I really don't remember who it was, but it was a writer who said, all that nonfiction can do is answer questions. It's fiction's business to ask the questions. Now, I think this is true, and it's particularly true of science fiction, although sometimes science fiction provides some answers. And this is remarkable because, you know, everything that, this has often been remarked on, and it's proof that in the public mind, science has a hold on the future. Because anything you write in the way of fiction set in the future is automatically classified as science fiction. Whether it has anything to do with science or not, that's how it is labeled. And if anybody's come up with a satisfactory answer of why that is, I haven't heard it yet. It might be because ordinary fiction is a chronicling of imagined events that happened sometime in an imaginary past, or a more or less actual past, even if only moments past. Where writing about the future involves events that have not yet happened, but which must be written about as though they have happened. You know, time travel fascinates readers of science fiction, and small wonder, all fiction set in the future involves the writer and his reader in time travel. We are transported forward in time and given a view of the world that has not yet unfolded, even if we as readers and writers are not part of the plot and don't get into time machines. The anomalous nature of time travel rests in the fact that the traveler comes out of an era, usually the present, and travels to an era in which he didn't exist or hasn't yet existed. There's always a paradox, because traveling to a concise past would obviously be a paradox, simply because the pure past to which you seek to return did not have you in it. In other words, if I went back to 1861 and shook hands with Abraham Lincoln, I wouldn't be going back to the past, the real past of Abraham Lincoln, because he never shook hands with me. And it becomes a different past. So unless you subscribe to a multiple universe theory, and there have been some pretty good stories that have forged on this premise, you have to camouflage the flaw as skillfully as possible. Travel into the future has a problem that's not similar in the way to travel into the past. It's really opposite, because where the past, like Mount Everest, is there is no future to go to. If you go to a place that is to become the future, then you're forming a future of which you will necessarily be a part when it finally arrives. And this is at odds, among other things, with the uncertainty principle. And it may be a very deep paradox. Not that it will ever inhibit an imaginative writer who can camouflage the fallacy and proceed with the plot. And to me, the very best science fiction is one that adopts a fallacy or some axiom that's not self-evident, maybe not even possible, and then disguises it so skillfully that a reader is not even aware of its presence. Once it's in place and operating, however, everything else that happens in the story should be purely orthodox, strictly rational, and acceptably scientific. No unwarranted assumption is evident in a good science fiction yarn, because whatever is fallacious is camouflaged to the nines, and everything else is tickety-boo and right out in the open. You know, there's one example of that I thought was an old movie. George Pal did a movie called Destination Moon, and I haven't seen it recently, but I think it still would stand up under modern knowledge, because he had the decency to assume an engine that he didn't explain, an engine that would allow a single-stage rocket to climb out of the gravity well of the Earth's surface and get into translunar orbit, land on the moon, take off from the moon and come back and have enough fuel for re-entry and so forth. By not explaining that, but just assuming it was there, you sort of forgot it, and it all seemed possible, and everything else that happened in the movie, as I remember it, was scientifically quite accurate. This is good science fiction. Within such a framework, there can be a high degree of originality, and it can be good. You may remember that Samuel Johnson once said on examining a manuscript of somebody that he obviously didn't respect, he wrote back, "Your manuscript is both good and original, but the part that is good is not original, and the part that is original is not good." And this fallacy or assumption shouldn't be based on a missing syllogistic element. You know, like a question like, what is the difference between a duck? You know, well, my father had a wonderful experience like this when he was a boy. Some kids, neighbor kids on an adjacent farm, came over to him one summer afternoon in high excitement, saying, "Our wells are in line." And he said, what do you mean? And he said, come over, take a look. He said, our wells are in line. And he goes over to their farm, and they get behind the pump shaft of their well. And he said, and the kids said, now look, you look right across there, and your well is right in line. And my father said, in line with what? And they said, in line with each other. And apparently they had discovered that there is a straight line between any two objects. It can't be that kind of a fallacy. Now, as to the future, serious futurology is usually characterized, almost always characterized, by failure of imagination. I'm talking about really trying to predict the future. There are many examples of this. One of my favorite is that over 100 years ago, some pundits said that air travel between the United States and Europe would remain forever impossible because you cannot keep the air in a balloon hot all the way across the Atlantic. Well, his because clause was almost correct, but the failure to imagine heavier than air machinery was what doomed that. In the realm of flight, there was a 90-year-old woman, and this is now 12, 15 years ago, who made a jet trip from San Diego to Independence, Missouri, and she had gone out as an 8-year-old girl in a wagon train, and it took her like 8 months to get out there. Imagine if some fortune teller had told that 8-year-old girl and her party going west, when you come back, you will make the trip. Suppose the fortune teller had said, you will make this trip back in 4.5 days. That would have been so fantastic, it would have been dismissed as nonsense. She came back in 4.5 hours. So we almost always fail in imagination about what the future might bring. To me, when I was 10 years old, I remember reading Buck Rogers, an excellent strip written by Phil Nolan and Dick Calkins. And it was called Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, because it was 2430 AD. And it was the belief then of the writers and creators of that strip and many scientists that humans would get to the moon and Mars and so forth, but that it would be 500 years in the future. And that year that I was reading it, it was to be 39 years until Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. Now, if somebody had told me that as a 10-year-old boy, I would have found it incredible that in that short a time this would begin to come to pass, actually. So almost always we fail in our ability to imagine what the future holds. And the future, of course, is something that we don't just strive to discern, we help to make. And that puts us in the position of a type of baseball umpire. Somebody once said that there are 3 kinds of baseball umpires. You have the objective umpire and the subjective umpire and the existentialist umpire. The objective umpire says a ball is a ball and a strike is a strike, and I call them as they are. Where the subjective umpire says a ball is a ball and a strike is a strike, and I call them as I see them. But the existentialist umpire says a ball is not a ball and a strike is not a strike until I call them. And we're sort of in the position of that umpire, I think, because imagine if there was a future, and imagine a person who now has a crystal ball that really tells what the future is. And he tells you that next Tuesday at 10 a.m. you're going to have your ankle broken because a garbage truck will run over your foot at the corner of 57th and Madison. And this is the real future. Can you not imagine that you might stay away from 57th and Madison next Tuesday at 10 a.m. and in so doing you would alter that future that he predicted, which means he didn't predict the real future. So the very act, and this has to do with epistemology and quantum mechanics and everything else, that our act of knowing alters what we tend to know about. And therefore the future is it is not written, as some cultures say. It is written. It is not written because we help to write it. A pernicious cliche has it that modern science, particularly physics, is so fantastic that it outstrips science fiction, and that the discoveries of the last few decades have revealed a universe so weird and so far out that no writer of fiction can rival it. I don't think this is true for this reason. After an examination of science fact and theory, the very latest proven facts and the very latest working hypotheses, the imaginative science fiction writer can always extrapolate trends and utilize intelligent speculation to compose compelling fiction that does honor to the scientific principle and is often truly prophetic. The prophets, of course, are without honor in their own land, particularly. Even if you're quite correct in the hard science world, it takes a while to establish your honor in any land. Albert Einstein once said, before the famous eclipse experiment that proved that relativity was correct, he said, if my theory of relativity is proven successful, Germany will claim me as a German, and France will declare that I am a citizen of the world. Should my theory prove untrue, France will say that I am a German, and Germany will declare that I am a Jew. Prophecy is a hard occupation because, and prophecy in fiction is in a way even a greater challenge. It must uncover truths that the universe wants to hide. The writer Jessamine West once wrote, fiction reveals truths that reality obscures. And this is true. That when I first heard that, it echoed in my mind that, I don't remember whether it was Stephen Hawking or somebody said that not only does God play dice, but he throws them where we can't see them. But there is prophecy. We know that, Jules Verne, for example, and when I think of the truths revealed by science fiction, from Jules Verne to Isaac Asimov, where you have, in Verne's case, he invented the principle of submarine, expelling ballast to change the ratio of water and air in a closed vessel, and he invented the submarine. He just didn't build one. He invented the incandescent bulb. And I remember when I first read Jules Verne, and he described having a bottle with a wire going up through it and putting electric current through it, and you could then get enough light to read by, and I thought, why doesn't he just say a light bulb? But this was way before the light bulb. He invented the storage battery, the acid metal plate storage battery. He didn't build them, is the only reason he's not the inventor of those, but he was a prophet of them. In the case of Isaac Asimov, before I get to that, let me just digress a second. Isaac may be tired of hearing me say this, but it's a true story that really cracks me up. When I was in my late teens, I read the first Isaac Asimov that I've read. And I later read other things by Dr. Isaac Asimov, and I naturally look up to him in my mind like he's in the generation of my father. And some years ago, when I had not met him, but someone said to me, there's a scientific meeting of some kind that you can come to, and you want to come to it because Isaac Asimov is going to attend. I said, oh, is he still around? Is he in his 90s or something? And they said, no, he's not old. And I said, well, he's got to be. I was reading him when I was a teenager. He was writing when he was a teenager. And we're the same age. That's what's really, really wonderful. Anyway, Isaac's ideas, I think, in the cybernetic world of rules for robots are something that now, the essence of much of this is creeping into the cybernetic field as safeguards in a computer world. So here again is prophecy that is of value. Anybody who says that science fiction is finished because of the strangeness of the universe is the same person who suggested closing the patent office late last century because everything had been invented. That actually happened. Most people in most cultures tend to think of the times they live in as a plateau that has finally been reached, that past eras were inadequate and quaint, but that now we're finally at the top of the mountain with maybe just a little fine-tuning left to do. Either that, or in the case of several past societies, they believe that there was some lost golden age where men were godlike and life was utopian, and that they somehow fumbled the ball through sin or error, and now must strive to get back to that golden time. In either case, there's never a widespread belief or understanding that great and unimaginable conditions await us in the future. And those conditions do not comprise a utopia or a paradise. Even our science fiction about the future, if it is to have drama, necessarily carries strife and anguish. There would be no drama in a paradise. There probably wouldn't be much zest for living either. You may remember that in George Bernard Shaw's Don Juan in Hell, he has a wonderful scene where the Spanish noblewoman who's in hell is so miffed at him and so complaining all the time about the conditions and everything. She bugs him till he's had it up to here, and he finally says to her, if you don't like it here, get out, go to heaven. And she says, you mean I'd be free to go? And he said, of course you are. Anybody is. He said, it's very dull up there. They sit around playing harps and singing hymns. He said, they're mostly all English. And he said they feel they owe it to their position. One of the beauties of well-written science fiction, I think, is that while technologies and clothing, customs, habitats, scientific beliefs, and power structures might be vastly different in the future, it's unlikely that human nature, human modes of thinking and emotional patterns will change very much in the next few millennia. And probably there won't be massive changes in human physiology. We may be healthier or sicker. We may realize more of our potential lifespan and bring up life expectancy somewhat. But we haven't changed much really in these things or in basic intellectual or emotional cast in the last 40 or 50,000 years at least. We may still in the far future have all kinds of problems, economic problems, legal problems, nervous breakdowns. When I think of legal problems, I have to think of something H.L. Mencken wrote a while back, because he always took such a marvelous view, cynical view of everything. He once said about how laughable our court systems are. He said, the penalty for laughing in court is $500 and 2 weeks in jail. If it were not for this penalty, the jury would never hear the evidence. But we may have difficulty in the future in dealing with our sexuality. We may have addictive personalities, maybe even the same attitude toward addiction. Wasn't it W.C. Fields who once said, "It was a woman drove me to drink, and I never even had the courtesy to thank her." And we might even have Freudian slips. I have to tell you, I brought up Freudian slips because I wanted to tell this story, and it's the only true story I know in broadcasting goofs of the type, the blooper type things, that a lot of records and tapes on bloopers. And the one that I do believe happened on the West Coast in the early 40s, and I didn't hear it, but I believe that it was true and not apocryphal, that there was a young rookie announcer at the NBC studios who had gotten a plum assignment of covering the premiere of a very important motion picture. And he was very earnest and very nervous about doing this. And that afternoon he was heard in the announcer's room woodshedding with some of the names of people that were likely to attend. And an older announcer heard him say, "Deborah Kerr." And the older announcer said, "That's Deborah Carr." And the kid said, "What is spelled? K-E-R?" And he said, "I know, it looks like Kerr, but take my word for it, it's Carr." So the kid thanked him, and he's saying, "Deborah Carr, Deborah Carr." And he's so conscientious, he wants to be sure he gets everything right. That evening on the air, live, he is heard to say, "Well, the celebrities are beginning to arrive now for this premiere." He said, "Darryl Zanuck's car has just moved up, and Mr. Zanuck is getting out now. Behind that is Charles Lawton's car, and Mr. Lawton and Elsa Lanchester are now going into the theater." He said, "And behind that is Deborah Carr's car." And he was so pleased that he got it right that he said, "And immediately following that is Alfred Hitchcar's cock." They had to restrain him from destroying himself. Anyway, it's not unreasonable to write a yarn set, say, 1,000 years in the future and have in it people who are essentially the same as their 20th century counterparts. In fact, I think if they were portrayed as grotesquely different, it would not be good science fiction. The human genome may have a stability that gives a long throw to our characteristics. We could conceivably endure like the ant or the Devonian shark for 300 million years. And I think that, why not? We're a pretty good and durable form as we are. Somebody once pointed out that as an animal, we are the most versatile on the planet, because we are the only animal on the earth that can swim a mile, run a mile, and climb a tree. There are some animals that can do 2 of those 3 things, and many animals that can do 1, but humans are the only ones that can do all 3. Now, I'm aware that genetic engineering is in the wings, and all the moral barriers and social cautions against irresponsible tampering with mechanisms that we don't fully understand will probably impede, but will not block, eventual projects and experiments on all forms of life on the earth. What this might produce is beyond my imagination. One can't imagine some of the horrors it might spawn, and if these occur, there could be a retreat for a time into leaving human life in the hands of nature. In any case, for genetic reasons already known, it's unlikely that we will drastically alter human physiology anytime soon. And so the future will probably have the same kind of humans we find in today's science fiction, because that's the kind of humans that we are and are among now. And I think there are good There are many reasons that have been advanced for this. You know, we don't, with our intellect, we don't take 100,000 generations to develop large eyes like the tarsi or membranes between our arm and body or feathers. We grind lenses and make telescopes and microscopes, and we put a gasoline engine on a kite at Kitty Hawk and we fly. So evolution is now, the reins of evolution are in the hands of human intellect. And as far as the strangeness of the universe is concerned, I think we'll take that in stride too, particularly in our science fiction. The truths that we'll continue to uncover will always, in their strangeness, be an inspiration to fiction. Mark Twain said, "Why shouldn't truth be stranger than fiction? Fiction, after all, has to make sense." Thank you.
We have among us tonight a Grandmaster. I won't extol him. He wouldn't believe a word I say anyway. But he will be introduced by a new member of SFWA and a dear friend of mine, Mr. Terry Brooks. Hang on to it.
All I could think about during Hugh's speech was, please God, don't let me be next. But I am, so I have to make the best of it. I had the foresight to write down what I was going to say tonight because I knew it would fly out of my head if I didn't. So at my maiden appearance here at Nebula's, please forgive me if I read most of what you're about to hear. The Grandmaster Nebula Award is given for a lifetime of achievement in the field, for career excellence in recognition that something lasting and meaningful has been accomplished through conviction and talent and hard work. I have believed for a very long time, as I believe now, that no one deserves this award more than this year's recipient, Lester Del Rey. Writer, critic, and editor, Lester's career in the field of science fiction fantasy spans more than half a century. You may not know this, but he got into the field on a dare. He made a bet with a girlfriend that he could write a science fiction story as good as one that he had just finished reading, and that when he sent it off, he would get back a personal letter from the editor in the bargain. He did that and got the story published to boot. The title of the story was The Faithful. The editor's name was John W. Campbell, and the year was 1937. Lester has written a lot of stories since then, a number of collections which contain my two favorite stories, and it comes out here in My Name is Legion. He wrote a number of novels as well, solid, nail-biting thrillers like The 11th Commandment and Nerves. He continues to write into his 7th decade, having just completed a short story that will be published as a part of a collection this fall. But I believe that Lester's most important contributions have been as an editor, particularly during the last 15 years at Ballantine Books, where science fiction fantasy is published under the imprint that bears his name. During that 15 years, he has virtually revolutionized the field by doing what many others have failed to do and what many more have doubted possible, by establishing that science fiction fantasy can sell competitively with any kind of book, that it can appear on the bestseller lists regularly, that it can find a readership beyond fandom. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great satisfaction to be able to introduce this year's winner of the Grandmaster Nebula, Lester Del Rey.
Well, I haven't written it down. I've never written a speech down yet, and I don't see why this should change any. I want to thank all of you, particularly Ben Bova, Terry Brooks, who proselyted to get me here. And let me say at once that this, unlike most awards, is one that I hold dear because of the list of those who have gone before me. Those are my friends. There are men I've respected, sometimes almost all my life.
And it bespeaks to me the high caliber of the award. Whether I deserve it with them or not doesn't matter. But I'd like to thank them. But above all, there are a whole host of people I'd like to thank because they are the ones who are responsible for anything good I have done. I've stuck to the pulp field all my life, which science fiction was. I don't care what they call it. John Campbell said that it was a specialized slick, but that's because his publishers wouldn't publish pulps. He knew it was a pulp, and I knew it was a pulp. I think perhaps the editors of the pulp magazines had to know more because of the tremendous pressure they were under about the techniques of fiction than anybody else. We had good editors who knew how to fill a magazine with satisfactory stories. We had very good editors who knew something much better, how to take a story that came in and make that the best possible story that that writer could ever do on that subject. But above all, to me, the great editor was John W. Campbell. He taught more by his rejections and his orders for a rewrite than I can ever begin to repay. He was, well, you've heard a lot of stories about John, at least a quarter of which are true. He wasn't quite the monster that a lot of you picture, but he was, for the first 12 years of his editing, he was, I think, the great editor of science fiction, the greatest of all, and a pretty damn good editor of fantasy, too. What I learned from him carried me the rest of my life. There have been a lot of other great editors, but they aren't here anymore. I'm sorry, but they aren't. I'm very sorry for this. I was very lucky. Those of my generation were damn lucky. Those who wrote westerns and those who wrote detective stories, and those particularly who were lucky enough to submit them to Black Mask in the old days. I have met some of those editors and talked to them. I can tell you right now, they were the genius of the field, and I wish they could be there, here, to take a Grand Master Award. I would gladly sacrifice mine for it. Unfortunately, I believe they're all dead. A great tragedy. I want to thank them, and again, I want to thank all of you. Thank you.
We do have a couple of regular old Nebulas to give out. And to present the Nebula for the best short story of the year, we have one of our premier story writers, a man who's written short stories, novels, nonfiction, poetry, filthy limericks, and God knows what else, Dr. Isaac Asimov.
Short story. The nominees for Best Short Story are Bears Discover Fire by Terry Bisson, The Power and the Passion by Pat Cadigan, Liesel by Karen Joy Fowler, Love and Sex Among the Invertebrates by Pat Murphy. Before I Wake by Kim Stanley Robinson. And Story Child by Kristine Kathryn Bush. And the winner is Bears Discover Fire by Terry Bisson.
People tell me my fiction runs a little short, so I hope you'll give me a little time here because I've got a lot of people I want to thank. I promised my wife Judy I'd never thank her, so I just want to say hi, and here I am. That's where I wanted to be. I want to thank Gardner and Sheila and the people at Asimov's. And I want to thank Ellen Datlow, who really helped me get started in the short story business. I want to thank my editor at Avon, John Douglas. And I owe a special thanks to David Hartwell, who pulled me into this business like he did so many other people. To Sue Trotter, who's been more than a friend, she's been an agent as well. And I wish I could thank my mother. I wish she was here to see this because she loved literature and she would have loved this moment. And the story was really, in a way, written about her. And at the risk of mixing metaphors, everybody knows there's a point in a work of fiction where you stop being the horse and you start being the rider. And I'd like to thank Bears itself for being such a fast little pony. It was a good story and it did something for me. And most of all, I'd like to thank the people here because science fiction was my first literature. It's been the literature I came back to. I'm very proud to be a science fiction writer, and I'm very proud to be recognized by this company of imaginative professionals, and I thank you all very, very much.
We now have the award for the best novelette. I have asked a man who has worked long and hard and virtually thanklessly for SFWA, an author, a novelist, an editor, and for many, many years the editor of the SFWA Bulletin, Mr. George Zebrowski, to give this award.
The nominees for Best Novelette are The Coon Rolled Down and Ruptured His Larynx, a squeezed novel by Mr. Skunk by David Abhue. Tower of Babylon by Ted Chiang. The Shobi Story by Ursula K. Le Guin. "172nd Scale" by Ian MacLeod. The Manamuki by Mike Resnick. A Time for Every Purpose by Kristen Kathryn Rusch. Loose Cannon by Susan Schwartz. Over the Long Haul by Martha Sukup. And the winner is Tower of Babylon by Ted Chiang. Is he here?
Make it all by yourself?
Yeah, Thanks. Ted didn't come tonight mostly because he's very shy, and he lives in Seattle now. But this, he didn't know anybody here. This is his very first published story, and it was sent to me by Tom Dish while Ted was in Clarion, at Clarion Workshop. but he did give me a note in case he did win. I'd like to thank my parents who let me pursue my writing instead of making me do something more traditional, like play the piano. I'd also like to thank Tom Dish for his encouragement and support, and Ellen Datlow, who said, here you can insert whom I worship as a goddess, if you like, for buying the story. Have fun, and oops, that was have fun and thanks anyway. I'm sure he'll be really happy.
To present the award for the best novella, we have a Nebula winner, Miss Joan Vinge. I'm checking these to make sure everything's spelled right, you know. Hello, Joan. Good to see you.
The nominees for Best Novella are Weatherman by Lois McMaster Bujold, Fool to Believe by Pat Cadigan, The Hemingway Hoax by Joe Haldeman, Mr. Boy by James Patrick Kelly, Bones by Pat Murphy. And the winner is The Hemingway Hoax by Joe Haldeman. You can't have it.
Hi, I'm not Joe Haldeman. For some reason beyond human comprehension, Joe Haldeman is in Iowa, you know, I mean, who can figure? But he told me to thank his editor at Morrow, to thank his editor at Avon, to thank Adrian Zackheim at Morrow and John Douglas at Avon, and to thank Sheila Williams for the copy editing work on the manuscript in Asimov's. And he also said that I should thank myself for buying the story at Asimov's, which he thought would stop me, but it's not going to, so. Thank you all.
Now, as some of you realize, being president of SFWA is not all beer and Skittles, but rank doth have its privileges, and I intend to personally present the award for Best Novel. The nominees for Best Novel are Tehanu, The Last Book of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, Mary Riley by Valerie Martin, The Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons, Only Begotten Daughter by James Morrow, Redshift Rendezvous by John E. Stith, and White Jenna by Jane Yolen. Judging from your applause, I'd say it's pretty much a tie. But the winner is Tehanu, The Last Book of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. And if no one's going to accept it, I'll take it home myself. Lou Aronica.
Ursula obviously didn't think she was going to win because she didn't bother to ask anybody to accept this. But as the publisher of the novel, I'll take it.
To all the winners, to all the nominees, and to all of you, thanks. Have a great party. Good night.
Hi, I'm here with Jim Frenkel, an editor at Tor Books. So, Jim, what did you think? Any surprises?
Well,
there weren't any really big surprises except perhaps Ted Chiang. It's unusual that a first story wins a Nebula, but that was nice. I think probably most people were most pleased about Terry Bisson, who's been writing a lot of very good stuff for a long time and has really done he's done yeoman service to the field over a number of years, and he's a good guy and a very talented writer. I think Ursula Le Guin was probably the least surprised because frequently there's one author who wins a Nebula because he or she is very well known and the work is so well known. And Tehanu, as you know, is the 4th book in the Earthsea trilogy, and so that was not surprising. I think the novel ballot was one that had so many unusual novels on it that perhaps people settled on the Le Guin because it was a known thing and something they could know they weren't going to be radically wrong about, though it is fantasy, and I think it's fantasy. I think of it as fantasy, but who knows? So that's unusual, but no real surprises.
Did you think it was unusual that Ms. Le Guin didn't think that she would win? She didn't come today?
Well, I don't know that she didn't think she was going to win. She lives in Portland, Oregon, and it's a long trip for her, and she's won awards before. And I really don't know whether she just thought she had no chance of winning. She may have thought that she wouldn't win because it was fantasy, but it wasn't the only fantasy on the ballot, so you never know.
Did you know about Hugh Downs' background in fantasy and science fiction?
No, I had no idea, but I did have an opportunity to talk with him before the award ceremony started, and I was very impressed with his vision of the field and his sense of the appropriateness of science fiction in history and as in the history of thought. He is, I think, quite perceptive, and it was a pleasant surprise to know that he's a big fan.
Thank you very much for talking with us.
You're welcome, Andrew.
You got 2 nominees tonight,
yes.
Which is pretty impressive.
Thank you.
How does it, were these your first nominations? Or?
No, I had one last year.
And you're also taking over, you got this great new position taking over Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. Do you have any deep, dark plans for this?
Well, I completely plan to subvert the magazine and make it something it never was before, and that's a joke. Actually, there'll be changes, and you'll see the first issue that I'm doing is the July issue, and you'll see some differences in the magazine, but as for content and things like that, I'm a different editor than Ed. We're different people. But we tend to like the same kind of writers and the same kind of fiction, so whatever shifts in the magazine will be very gradual.
All right, well, congratulations on your nominees. At least you look very good standing up there with the photo session with 2.
Thank you.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
Now we have El Compañero Presidente himself, Mr. Ben Bova, our Master of Ceremonies this evening. So this went very nicely.
I'm very pleased. I think that Hugh gave a very nice talk. Very few people recognize Hugh Downs, the television personality, as a science fiction writer, but I think with a little luck we'll get him to join SFWA, and he'll be a dues-paying member.
That would be nice.
Yeah, we can use every penny we can get. But Hugh is he's a really seriously interested man, seriously interested in cosmology. He's been working on this. He took a degree in astronomy. You know, very few people recognize this, but he's one of us. He's part of our brotherhood and sisterhood.
Well, congratulations on a smooth running ceremony.
Thank you. I think we had a very lovely dinner. Everything went well. I was terrified earlier in the evening that not everybody had been informed of the change in venue.
Right.
So, you know, we were supposed to be in one hotel and suddenly we were switched to another. But everybody showed up, everybody performed well, so we can't really ask for much more. It was a lovely evening, and I think we had a marvelous set of award winners. Very good stories.
Well, congratulations, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thus endeth the 26th Annual Nebula Awards. Well, what'd you think?
What did I think? What did you think?
No, I asked you first.
I was upset that we didn't get to meet Ursula K. Le Guin.
That's true. That would have been nice.
And I thought it was neat that Hugh Downs was a science fiction type. I didn't know that.
learned all sorts of nifty new things.
Yes, I did.
But,
So what did you think?
Well, I think Tehenu certainly deserved it. I mean, it was a fantastic book. I loved it all to pieces, so it was nice to see it winning. And it was, you know, nifty for all the short story writers. It would have been nice if more people actually turned up. I mean, 3 out of the 4 didn't actually make it.
But we were here.
That's true. We were. So that's it for the Nebula Awards.
And so, from the Roosevelt Hotel, I'm Andrea Lipinski.
I'm Keith DeCandido.
Good night.
This presentation of the 26th Annual Nebula Awards was made possible through the generous support of Tor Books, a publisher of fantasy and science fiction books available at your local bookstore, including 3 new hardcovers: The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan, The Phoenix Guards by Stephen Bruce, and Xenocide by Orson Scott Card. Davis Publications. This year's Nebula winners include Joe Haldeman's The Hemingway Hoax and Bears Discover Fire by Terry Bisson, both of which appeared in Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. Analog Science Fiction Science Fact also received a nomination. If you would like to subscribe to either magazine, please call 1-800-338-7531 or write to Davis Science Fiction Titles, Department, NEBU, P.O. Box 40, Vernon, New Jersey, 07462. Baen Books, publishers of S.M. Sterling, Lois McMaster Bujold, Elizabeth Moon, Anne McCaffrey, and other writers of quality fun science fiction, including the new bestseller, Fallen Angels, by Larry Niven, Jerry Purnell, and Michael Flynn. The Chronic Rift, a talk show on fantasy, science fiction, and comics, shown every Monday afternoon at 4:30 on Manhattan Cable's Channel 17, featuring news, commentary, and the Roundtable, a panel discussion with both fans and professionals covering all aspects of the genre. Episodes are also available on video cassette. For a free catalog, write to The Chronic Rift, P.O. Box 2224, New York, New York, 101850023. Bantam Spectra, the winning name in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. This year garnering 5 Nebula nominations in 3 categories, including 2 for Best Novel. In 1989, Bantam Spectra author Elizabeth Scarborough won the Best Novel Award for The Healer's War. And now, for the 2nd year in a row, Bantam Spectra is proud to publish the winner of the Nebula for Best Novel, Tehenu by Ursula K. Le Guin. Tehenu, the long-awaited conclusion to Le Guin's acclaimed Earthsea cycle, available wherever Bantam Spectra books are sold. Omni magazine congratulates Ted Chiang on his Nebula for Tower of Babylon. Omni is proud to be the home of award-winning science fiction. For subscriptions to Omni, please call 1-800-289-6664.